say if you dig deep enough into the Siberian permafrost, the ground stops sounding like dirt and starts sounding like a choir of the damned. In 1970, the Soviets punched a hole 40,000 feet into the dark, only to seal it shut with steel and silence. They didn't stop because they ran out of money. They stopped because something from the bottom started climbing up the drill bit. I used to think that was a campfire story. Then I found a hole that wasn't on the maps, and I realized some things are buried for a reason. I went down. I didn't come back to the same world. On May 24th, 1970, the Soviet Union started a project known as the Kola Super Deep Borehole. It's a 40,000-foot scar in the earth that supposedly reaches the ceiling of hell. But that isn't the only hole. Deep in the desolate Russian wilderness, there are dozens of these pipes unprotected, rusted, and forgotten. The biggest mistake of my life was stepping near one. A year ago, my work as a scientist took me to a tiny Siberian fishing village. It was a bleak place of 200 people, mostly hunters who drank vodka to forget the cold. Being a geologist had gotten me into strange situations before, but nothing like this. I became friends with the only cop, Vadim. He spoke basic English and mostly spent his time escorting drunks home. It was a bizarre world, cut off from civilization. Until the 9th month, a 7-year-old girl named Daria vanished. She had been playing near an abandoned Soviet-era silo. When we arrived, the doors had been broken down, revealing a black abyss, a hole 50 feet wide, reaching into a darkness so thick it felt heavy. In the center sat an ancient elevator platform. The other children swore they heard Daria crying for help from the depths. It gave false hope to the terrified mother, but I knew in my heart the fall would be lethal. Vadim, my colleague Stanley, and I volunteered for a rescue mission. We donned ill-fitting pressure suits while mechanics revived the old machinery. Documents claimed the temperature down there hit 150 degrees Fahrenheit. I knew we were just retrieving a body, but we stepped onto that rattling metal cage anyway. As we descended, the numbers on the depth gauge flickered, 1 foot per second. "You think this is dark?" Vadim joked, his voice echoing off the damp walls. "Wait until the Siberian winter." We tried to laugh, but at 500 feet, the walkie-talkie hissed. Vadim's face went pale. "What are they saying?" I asked. "They're asking for our depth," he mumbled, but his eyes were fixed on the ceiling. He knew we shouldn't be able to hear the surface chatter so clearly through the rock. At 1,000 feet, a voice drifted up from the darkness below. "Help." It was a soft, melodic cry. My heart stopped. "Vadim, did you hear that?" "Hear what?" "Help me." It came again. I gestured for silence. Vadim finally heard it too, but the voice wasn't speaking Russian. It was speaking perfect English. As the elevator passed 7,000 feet, the very air began to taste like wet copper. The ancient gears started to moan, sounding less like machinery and more like a massive dying heart. Thick slime, pulsing with violet light, was weeping from the stone pores. When I touched the metal cage, it felt warm. It felt like skin. The voices weren't human. As we descended, we saw the echoes. These beings represented a terrifying fusion of biological horror and cosmic mimicry. Their heads, which I call the faces of glass, were smooth, featureless, domes of pale, translucent skin that looked like stretched parchment. They had insect eyes, no noses, and no ears. The only break in their smooth face was a jagged, horizontal slit that stretched from ear to ear, hiding rows of needle-thin translucent teeth. Inside those slits, I could see the mimic throat, a vibrating, black organ that pulsed like a speaker. This is how they created the English voices. It didn't move like a human mouth. It trembled at such a high frequency that it blurred, creating a sound that felt like it was being projected directly into my brain. Their warped anatomy was even worse. Their limbs were impossibly long and thin, with extra joints that allowed them to fold themselves into the narrow cracks of the rock walls. Their skin was a sickly, bruised gray-violet, and in some places, I could see their black, oily blood pumping through veins that glowed with a faint, dying light. Taking inspiration from a nightmare, these beings weren't purely organic. They were mechanical fusions. In the deep pressure of the shaft, their bodies had fused with the rusted Soviet metal. I saw a rusted gear protruding from a shoulder blade and copper wire threaded through their rib cages like parasitic worms. They didn't stand. They used a predator stance, clinging to the walls of the shaft like oversized bats with obsidian talons hooked deep into the stone. They moved with a terrifying, jerky motion like a film skipping frames, making it impossible to track exactly how close they were until they were right behind. At 9,000 feet, the pressure began to warp time. I watched Stanley's face lag. His expressions changed seconds after he spoke. Every breath felt like swallowing needles. The hole wasn't bad. It was a digestive tract. We were nutrients being pulled into the belly of a cosmic beast. The light Vadim saw wasn't heavenly. It was a blinding white strobe that revealed the shaft was lined with millions of reaching human limbs, woven together like sick roots. There was no bottom, just a sea of pale flesh and white eyes waiting to catch us. The singing wasn't a choir. It was the synchronized screaming of everyone who had ever fallen in. At 10,000 feet, the elevator bucked. I slammed against the bars. When I woke, Vadim and Stanley were gone. They had simply erased. The light took me next. It didn't just transport me, it rewrote me. I felt my DNA unspooling, edited by a cold intelligence. I felt the missing continent, a landmass called Aethelgard that once sat in the Pacific, being scrubbed from my memory, replaced by a dull, aching void. I woke up a week later in a hospital. Hunters found me in the forest. They told me my story was impossible. No silo, no hole, no village. Back in the US, my house was owned by strangers. My friends' numbers reached unrelated people. The geography of this world is wrong. Aethelgard is gone from every map. There are countries here I've never heard of. I'm not in my world. And sometimes, late at night, I can still hear the singing of the echoes coming from behind my bedroom walls. If you've ever noticed a glitch in your memory or a place on the map that seems to have vanished, you might be an echo like me. The riddle. I have no voice, but I can mimic yours. I have no eyes, but I saw you fall. I am the continent on your map that you can't recall. What am I? Answer in the comments. Like and subscribe to hear the truth about the second hole they found in the Appalachian Mountains. Share this video before this reality's internet deletes it forever on the streets. This was a soft kill.